Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome back to Children's Church. I'm so glad to have you here with me. And all this month we've been talking about faith. I say all this month like we're very far into it, a little bit. Anyway, today we're talking about a guy named Daniel. Yes, you know where this story's going. We're going to talk about Daniel in the lion's den. There's a lot of stories about Daniel. He in fact has a whole book named after him because he was a prophet of God. So he's in the section of the Bible called the Prophets. Very simply named, a bunch of books of the Bible that are all about different prophets in the land of Israel, or the land outside of Israel, but where God's people were, as is the case of Daniel, who was held prisoner in a foreign empire. Miss Mandy needs to slow down a little. My bad, I'm just giving you some historical context. So Daniel has been held captive in a foreign land for most of his adult life. And we're jumping in about 6 chapters into the book of Daniel. He has more chapters to go. He lived so much life. But this is his most famous story, and it's the one I'm going to tell you today. Darius, the king, decided to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, stationed throughout the realm and over the 3 administrators, including Daniel. These satraps would be accountable to Daniel, so the king would not be defrauded. And Daniel distinguished himself above the administrators and satraps because of extraordinary spirit, so the king planned to set him over the whole realm. The administrators and satraps therefore kept trying to find charges against Daniel regarding the kingdom, but they couldn't find any charges or corruption because he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Then they said, "We'll never find anything against him unless we make something against him." So the administrators went to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects and satraps, the advisors and governors, have agreed that the kingdom should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days, anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. Therefore, your majesty established an edict, and Darius, who at this point has been buttered up, and they kind of manipulated it into it. They flattered him. Signs it. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house, and the windows in his upper room opened toward Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to God, just as he had done before. Then these men went into the group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. So they approached the king and asked about his edict. As the law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable. And they replied to the king, "Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, that you signed, for he prays 3 times a day." And as soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased. He set his mind on rescuing Daniel, made every effort until sundown to deliver him. Then these men went to the king and said to him, "You as king know it is law of the Medes and Persians that no edict or ordinance the king established can be changed." So the king gave an order, and they brought Daniel in and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, who you serve, continually rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God," the king said, "has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Then Daniel spoke. "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They haven't hurt me, for I was found innocent before him. And I have not committed any crime against you, my king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den uninjured, for he trusted in his God. The king then gave the command, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown in the lion's den. Whoa. I think it's an interesting story for a lot of reasons, but I want to talk about Darius for a second. Darius didn't hate Daniel. In fact, He loved him and he trusted him, and he put him in charge because he knew he was a good man. And when he realized he'd been tricked, he tried everything he could to undo what he'd done. But sometimes there isn't any fixing what we did. All Darius could do, all Daniel could do, was leave it in God's hands, whether or not an innocent man would be killed for worshiping God. And God didn't allow it to happen. God sent an angel into the lion's den to shut their mouths. And Daniel spent the night in a cave full of hungry lions, completely unharmed. They never bit him. They never tried anything, because God was there protecting him. And Darius was overjoyed at this. Darius cried out to God and began to serve God after that. Daniel's faith changed the king, and when you change a king, you change a nation. Daniel's faith was enough to change the nation of his captors. Remember that. They had attacked Jerusalem and stolen their children. They had subjugated them. And in this foreign land of foreign gods, with people plotting against him, God stood with Daniel, and Daniel came out victorious, unharmed, and with a changed king and kingdom. What a wonderful amount of faith. How steadfast was Daniel that all those changes could happen, because he looked at what was going on around him and said, I will follow God. And God said, and I will walk with you. That's what I want you guys to remember this week. God is walking with us always, and is always willing to shut the lions' mouths for us. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you next week to talk more about faith. Bye.